Welcome. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you today about some of the shared understandings that are important to us to come to in order to allow us to understand the Centers for Disease Control's One Health, and to use this understanding to interpret and discuss scientific literature regarding the inextricable link between planetary and body ecosystems, so our Earth as a body, our body as a planet, and the many ecosystems therein that are inextricably linked, and their biodiversity is linked, and to think about how anthropogenic factors can contribute to a dysbiosis or an imbalance in those ecosystems, both on our planetary body and on the Earth as body. So we're going to come to some shared understanding of terminology around that and leave you ready to do some very sexy-minded reading. Let's begin by looking at this concept of One Health. So if you do a quick search, you'll find the Centers for Disease Control's One Health website. You can also directly type in the URL that I have provided here. This idea that health of the planet is inextricably linked to human health, that the health of all of the inhabitants, all the way from the microbial, all the way to the macroscopic, are inextricably linked. And if one is imbalanced or in dysbiosis, right, out of balance, then the others are likely to fall out of balance as well. So we have to think across ecosystems, across scales, in order to begin to understand ways in which we can promote the health of all of the inhabitants of our planet, the inhabitants of our Earth as planet. So let's begin with some terminology that will be important to discussing this topic. Epidemiology is defined as the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in specified populations, and the application of this study to the control of health problems. So this is a little bit of a mouthful, and one that maybe is a little bit hard to program into your mind. So let's say it this way. We want to know about how disease within our different ecosystems is connected and how it impacts ultimately humans. So sometimes we can even think about this idea of epidemiology is the study of those things that befall on the human population. But if we start to recognize that we're inextricably linked with all other populations, we start to recognize that epidemiology becomes even more difficult to quantify. The figure that I'm providing here and sharing with you here comes from one of my favorite websites provided by one of my favorite data visualization experts. So David McCandless, in his Information is Beautiful Coronavirus Data Pack. This is just one figure that shows us data that allows us to start to better understand the distribution, in this case, of COVID-19 and its particular variants. So allowing us to understand how it's affecting and impacting human populations in differential ways. That's epidemiology. When we think about particular pathogens that are impacting us, well, first off, let's just say, what the heck is a pathogen? A pathogen is a microorganism that causes disease. So that is to say, for example, SARS-CoV-2 is the pathogen, the virus that causes COVID-19. Likewise, we could think about something like a bacterium, like Streptococcus pyogenes, that causes strep throat. We could think also about fungal infections. For example, there is a fungus that causes athlete's foot. So these are different kinds of microorganisms, from viruses to bacteria to eukaryotic organisms, fungus, and things like protozoa that can cause human disease. All of these are defined as pathogens because they do cause a disease manifestation. They're causative agents. Currently, a majority of novel and re-emerging infectious diseases are zoonoses. Zoonocy, or a zoonotic infection, is a fancy way to say that these are diseases that are transmitted from other animals to humans. The reason for this is that we are encroaching upon landscapes that were once biodiverse in a way that didn't incorporate humans. So there's a lot of change in the way that we're using land, the ways in which we are deforesting land, the ways in which we are using intensive agriculture in land, and causing transmission of disease from one host to another, from one animal to another. This will be important terminology as we just dive into some of this literature. Many of the factors that impact the transmission of zoonotic infection are anthropogenic. Anthropogenic meaning environmental change caused or influenced by people, either directly or indirectly. Now that is a commonly used term, but when we think about it at this point, we can say that things like the example that I gave of deforestation is a really good one, right? As we systematically deforest certain ecosystems, we're recognizing the opening for transmission and exposure to new animals and the movement of disease from one animal to another. As we work to understand anthropogenic climate change, it is inextricably linked to our understanding of ecosystems and biodiversity. An ecosystem can be defined in a couple of different ways. National Geographic defines it as an area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscapes, work together to form a bubble of life. I like certain aspects of this definition, this idea that we are seeing an interaction between both biotic and abiotic factors in order to form a network of things that interdepend upon one another. I'm not sure I like the term bubble, because I'm not sure that one can say that an ecosystem is ever its own bubble, because ecosystems are all impacting other ecosystems. So, for example, if we think about a marine ecosystem, then we would recognize that that is inextricably linked to terrestrial ecosystems, right? What happens in the oceans changes what happens on the land. So I don't know, I'm starting to try to think about ways that I would want to define an ecosystem. Maybe this idea of inextricably linked networks of biotic and abiotic members that together functions in harmony when biodiversity is maximized. We can think about biodiversity as being the species variability across this network. And so we can have that kind of species variability on a microbial level, right? Remember the microorganisms that inhabit, the trillions of microorganisms that inhabit our skin and our gut. And those ecosystems work best when they're in balance. So if you take antibiotics and you wipe out some of the microorganisms in your gut, you are disrupting the biodiversity of those environments and therefore their ability to function in harmony. And the same is true on Earth. If we release toxic chemicals into marine environments, we're disrupting the biodiversity and therefore the ability of the ecosystem to function in harmony. So I created this particular image using the Wombo Dream app. We're going to use that app some in order to allow us to make visualizations around the words that we're using to describe things. So this one, biodiversity and ecosystems, were the words that I used to create this image within that application. So we are now poised to better understand One Health and the inextricable link between the health of the many species inhabiting the earth and human health. Epidemiology, not what happens onto humans. Boy, that's such an interesting definition, because truthfully, what happens onto any species happens onto us all. And where we saw a massive explosion of infectious disease in bats and in amphibians, it is only a matter of time before we see that explosion of infectious disease in humans as well. So until we can come to understand those links, we will not be able to control infectious disease within human populations as well. This is an article that hopefully with this vodcast you are now poised to be able to understand. So I highly suggest it. The COVID-19 pandemic is intricately linked to biodiversity loss and ecosystem health by Lawler et al. And this is in Lancet Planet Health just this year, and just recently received this on one of my feeds. Absolutely beautiful article. We're also poised to understand One Health. And I want to share with you the microbiology capstone website, where all of the projects that we do are informed by the notion of One Health. So go ahead and root around on that website, https://UW and microbiology capstone. So it's actually capstone.weebly.com. Additionally, this class kicks off the 2021 version of a course that began in 2015 when we traveled to Strebské Pleso, Slovakia, and we began our One Health approach for integrating Nordic ski racing, sustainability of international racing in the face of climate change, with our first version of the class that this kicks off. So you can see that all of the projects that manifested in this course and continue to manifest in this course are informed by the One Health notion. And these are just a couple of examples of the projects that have come from that. And you can access this at uwionordic.com/Slovakia.html. With that being said, I can't wait to talk to you more about the inextricable link between biodiversity, One Health, and planetary dysbiosis versus what we're going to coin pluriverse biosis, which is the notion that when we take on problems through a transdisciplinary lens and we meld our ways of knowing across not just disciplinary ways of knowing, but ways of knowing that are culturally rooted, that we may come to a more adequate explanation that allows us to move towards planetary and human health.